Hi friends, welcome to Happy, Holy, Healthy Life. Today I wanted to make a video just talking with you guys honestly about some of the things that I really wish I knew before marriage. And I know that when I was a single young lady, I read a ton of Christian self-help books, a ton of, godly marriage books, just so many different things. But I especially focused on the kind of books that talked about when God writes your love story because they really gave me a lot of hope. But one thing that I tended to notice is that after the people got married, they didn't always share some of the difficulties of married life. They didn't really talk about their struggles or their hurts or their heartaches or the pain that can sometimes be evident even in a God-written love story. So I just think, since I shared with you guys the story of how God brought my husband and I together, I think that it would also be good for me to tell you guys some of the things that were kind of hard, some of the things that were kind of surprising, because if you go into marriage knowing some of the things that could be challenges, and if you even prepare for them in your single season, I think your marriage is gonna have a much smoother beginning. So I am gonna talk about a bunch of things. Some will be spiritual, some will be just practical things, and they're gonna be kind of mixed up together. So I would really encourage you, if you can, to stick all the way through to the end, even if you have to pause this video and come back to it later, because these are truths that are one out of 8 years of some pretty intense trials and battles that my husband and I have faced. But I just want to encourage some people, whether you're married and coming up against obstacles, or whether you're a single girl thinking like, oh, if I could just get married, all my problems would be over. I just want to encourage anybody that needs to hear these truths today. So I'm going to start out with a really big one that was a huge revelation to me. And it's the fact that your husband is not going to fulfill all of your deepest longings and needs. And I'm looking around to see if I can find any props. So this is what I have nearby. So I'm just gonna use this as a prop, okay? So let's say the purple container is the place that only God can fill. I say, things with an ILL with a Texas accent, you'll have to excuse me. But yeah, so this is God's space in your heart. And maybe this little ladybug container is a place that's specifically for your husband. Well, I think in our culture, we kind of combine the two and we say, you know what, when you get married, your husband is gonna fill all of these things in your heart. But really, if you kind of use the icing in the cake analogy, this will be kind of like a giant cupcake. This purple jug here, this is the part that only God could fill. So even if your husband is just the sweet man that he is, does everything that he can do to fulfill his section of your heart, if you don't have the Lord and his touch and his healing and his intimacy in your heart and your life, you're still going to have this huge gigantic section. So I'm not a huge math person, but let's just say for a made up percentage that maybe your husband can only fill 1/4 of your heart. He can only fulfill the place that God has ordained for him to fill. But really think about it in real life. If 75% of you is empty, then this 25% is not going to make a huge difference. Whereas let's say you're single, but the Lord has, fulfilled you. You're in relationship with him. He's bringing healing into your heart and life. You can have a pretty fulfilling, joyful life at 75%. Would it be nice to have this, extra 25%? Yes, it would be. But as you'll hear in many marriages, there's a lot of women that are married and their husband is not fulfilling his, let's say, 25% of her heart. And again, these are just made up fractions to prove a point, to give you an analogy that it really, really is true. There's only so much that your husband can do. Maybe at certain parts in your marriage, in your life, maybe your husband can only fulfill half of what he should. Does that kind of make sense? But as long as you have this foundation of the Lord in your life and filling you up, then you're going to be able to have some semblance of a joyful, happy life, okay? So, and I can make another video about how do you actually get filled by God, but I just remember a distinct moment within the first year of my marriage where I felt so silly thinking this, but I was like, wow, I really do still need God, because it was a tough first year, and I'll get into that later, but we had a challenging first year of marriage. We really did. We left Texas for the Midwest. My husband was going to seminary, even though I had a bachelor's degree called the Director of Christian Education. I was literally working in Walmart, and then I ended up working in a cafe. Then I ended up, in addition to working in a cafe, working, an additional job at an after-school program in the inner city of St. Louis for several hours. So it was just a really kind of intense season of, my husband adjusting to going to seminary, me kind of feeling lost and without an identity, because I had really expected just the way my life was planned out to be in full-time youth ministry. At the time, my husband was on track to become a Lutheran pastor. We are no longer in the Lutheran denomination, and that's a story in and of itself. But the point is that things were not quite looking how I thought they were. At the time, he was very, very unhappy in the particular seminary that he was going to. And it was a season of intense trials. And so I remember kind of just waking up in the morning being depressed, thinking, wow, like this was supposed to be my dream. I thought that I had my dream husband and we were going to go to St. Louis and he was going to become a pastor and I was going to be a youth minister, but just nothing was kind of panning out the way we had expected, and there was a lot of rough adjustments between our personalities and our family backgrounds and everything in the beginning. And so it really became clear to me that I needed God. I needed my devotion time. And it was kind of cool at the time because I actually worked at a cafe that was right next to the seminary, and they had this library they'd have tons of free books, and I'm like a book fanatic. And so I would literally just go like grab free Christian books, after work, like a total weirdo, I'm sure, but it was just kind of a lifeline for me. There were so many great books actually that I read that year. Corrie ten Boom books come to mind, but anyway, it was just such a lifeline for me to have almost like a reconnection with God, because I think in our culture especially, women are led to believe that, a man is going to be the thing that cures your heart and the thing that cures your life, and you'll just never be the same, and et cetera, et cetera. But I'm pretty sure any married woman will tell you, any woman in a relationship will tell you that a man just cannot do for your heart and for your life what a relationship with Jesus can do. And again, I'd like to make another separate video on what that looks like practically, because I'm a huge practical person and I like to know steps and what do I do specifically. So I would like to make another video on that. But I'll go ahead and move on to an additional point that I don't know that I was completely expecting. If you are in a Christian marriage, spiritual warfare is real. If you don't know what spiritual warfare is, basically it's when Satan, the enemy of God and God's people, specifically targets attacks directed at you and your life and your calling and your destiny. And if you do have an awesome calling in God, which I believe that you do if you're watching this video, the devil's not going to want that to happen. And especially for my husband and I, the thing that brought us together and really was the foundation of our marriage was our love for God first, and then also our desire to really dedicate and pour out our lives in ministry. And whew, boy, can I tell you stories? Satan really has come against both of those dual callings, to be lovers of God and to be people who serve in the ministry. It seems like, Satan has done everything he can, and that's another video all in itself, to really stop the plans that God has for us. And so just be aware, whether it be, you're dating a godly guy and you're a godly woman, and maybe you're in a courtship phase, maybe you're in an engagement phase, don't be surprised when attacks basically come against your relationship. It can come in the form of doubts and confusion, constantly going back and forth, like I think this is God's will, I don't think this is God's will, and just a lot of confusion about the next step. It can come in the form of temptation by, being attracted to other people. It could come in the form of, just in your flesh, a lot of selfishness rising up where you're wanting to constantly demand your own way, and, just a lot of personality conflicts. It can come even in different seasons of attacks on your mental or physical or emotional health. You can find yourself in an intense season of depression or experiencing like strange physical symptoms that it seems to be coming out of nowhere. All of those things things can really be a result of the attacks of the enemy. And so I would just encourage you to stay really, really prayed up. And I remember a distinct time in my marriage where I felt like just God spoke to my heart, the amount of prayer that you needed to do to be in this relationship, to have this marriage come to pass, is the amount of prayer that you need to continue to really have, you know, a joyful and peaceful marriage. And if you've watched any of my testimony videos, you'll know that I had done a lot of praying, probably from the age of 15 or 16 all the way up through the age of 24 when I initially got married. And it was a battle all the way through, and a lot of attacks that came against us after being married. Now, let me mix it up with some kind of lighter, more silly kind of things, but they're not really silly sometimes when you're in the midst of it. So a lot of times, this is just a little tip for the ladies, a lot of times housework tends to fall to the women. And so if you are just a naturally kind of sloppy, messy person, if you're disorganized, if you're not much of a planner, you know, if your idea of eating is as rolling through a drive-through, almost all of those things were true of me. Even at the age of 24 when I got married, I feel like I was still missing a lot of life skills. And so I think because I've always been interested in little things like decorating, and I like read organizing books, it doesn't mean that I was actually skilled in those areas. And interest does not equal a skill. So I think I just kind of thought magically we would fall into a routine, and, you know, dishes would be done and laundry would be done and dinner would be planned. But kind of a lot of times, guys, a little bit expect women to do that. It's not always the case. There might be a situation where, you know, a husband is like super organized and on top of cooking meals, and like maybe the woman is like, oh, this is great. But a lot of times still, you know, it's just kind of the way it is sometimes. So I would just encourage singles of both genders to really kind of brush up on your organization and management skills, cooking skills. Just really think about what do you want your life to be? Having a vision for the simple things in life, just even like what condition do you want your home to be in? What kind of diet do you want? And it's no joke. I'm pretty sure the first year of marriage, my husband and I think maybe it was just me, I don't know, but I gained like 20 something pounds. Cause like I said, I ended up working in this cafe/bakery, and they were always giving away like all these free cookies and cupcakes and just everything. And there was like lattes, and it just was a dream come true. They even had like soups and sandwich and just everything. So I was just like eating up a storm. So, and because I didn't have, again, those organizational skills and those like really great cooking skills, it just was so much easier for me to like eat a bunch of like sugary free food, or just after being super tired after working 2 jobs and it's like 7 o'clock at night, it was just too easy to say, let's roll through the drive-through. And so just, it seems like something small and silly, but it ended up actually creating a lot of conflicts, because my husband had grown up in a household that they were very healthy eaters. They had meal plans, you know, they were super organized. Like, you know, his family were like couponers, and just like pretty much everything that like my family really wasn't in that situation. And so it did create a lot of conflicts, and it was just one of those things that it's been a journey to iron out. So just something to think about. I kind of wish I had have gotten on top of those skills a lot before marriage. It would have saved a lot of conflicts, and, you know, like 60 extra pounds later at this point, like what, 8 years later, you know, having those healthy cooking skills, organization, discipline, all of those skills are something that you're going to want later. So another one, this is another more serious one, but it's something that I don't think a lot of people expect. So you'll hear a lot of videos on, you know, maintaining purity when you're dating, purity in your single life, but it is just as essential to have standards of purity when you're married, and that oftentimes involves your interactions with other people, because more likely than not, you know, you're going to be in the workforce, you know, maybe you're going to the gym, you're going to be out and about. And again, with, you know, the devil being a tempter and being against Christian marriages, it would not be unsurprising if people show up in your life that you find attractive or interesting or funny. And so if in your single years you were in the habit of just falling into like fantasies and crushes and obsessions, I think most people think that that kind of thing would disappear after being married. But if you kind of put the formula together, you have like super high hopes when you get married. Oftentimes there's like a lot of a letdown, basically, because you find out that all those expectations were completely unrealistic, and then you're vulnerable if you haven't been really upkeeping your relationship with God, and then you're having conflicts over silly things like who's going to do the laundry and whether or not we should eat McDonald's for the 6th time again tonight. And then all of a sudden there's this person at work that, you know, in your single days would have totally been your type, and they seem so nice and they seem so perfect. You can only kind of do the math. The devil can really put a lot of temptation in your way. And so those same kind of boundaries, you know, that you really sought after and valued as a single person, those really can't go away, you know, for all genders. Just standards of modesty. You know, we came up with little things. We ended up moving after about a year of being in St. Louis. The seminary situation didn't work out, and we moved someplace else. And, you know, my husband ended up going to a Bible college that, you know, had a lot of young people. And so we kind of created the standard that he wasn't just going to be giving girls rides home. And to some people that might seem like a little silly or a little ridiculous, but, you know, we just kind of wanted to put some guards and protections in place, you know, so that we're not giving the enemy a foothold. We're not giving the enemy ground just by being kind of careless with our lives. And just another thing to note, you know, if you have struggled with impurity, with the things you're watching or listening to or looking at, a lot of people believe that, oh, you know, as soon as I get married and I have a so-called outlet for my desires, then those temptations will go away. But, you know, many married men and women will tell you that those kind of bad habits, if you want to call them that, those sin problems just do not disappear when you get married. Some people find it intensified because, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes there's such a high unrealistic fantasy expectation of what marriage is, and then there's the huge crash of what it's not, and then that can send people into thinking that maybe they married the wrong person, or, you know, just even a despair of thinking, wow, I'll never get my needs met the way I thought I would, so now I need to turn to these other things that I'm in the habit of turning to. So that's just kind of a word of warning, exhortation, that, again, just kind of like the habits, you know, in your single life and the areas of practical things like cooking and cleaning, there's mental and spiritual and emotional habits that we have as single people that follow us into marriage, whether for better or for worse. So another thing that surprised me a little bit is the amount of work it takes to have just any semblance of a joyful, peaceful, happy marriage. Now, I would say, of course, depending on people's temperament, sometimes maybe two people might marry that are very just calm, peaceful, relaxed, kind of type B, go with the flow kind of people. So maybe there will not be so many like storms and fireworks with those people that have that kind of temperament. But I think more often than not, you've probably heard that opposites attract. And so you really have to work on getting along. There's a lot of negotiation, a lot of communication, a lot of work that's really required to have a happy, joyful marriage. And so I think that's surprising to a lot of people, because in the beginning, all of the like butterflies and excitement and exhilaration and like starry-eyed feelings of love, you know, you kind of think, oh, those things, those feelings are going to last forever. But it does change over time. And if you're like a science nerd or whatever, you can totally research the chemical changes that happens in, you know, couples in the span of 2 years or less, you know, basically to kind of oversimplify it, those kind of starry-eyed in love Romeo and Juliet feelings tend to kind of go completely away, and it morphs into a mature, sustained familial love. So if you want, you know, that sense of like romance and adventure and just, you know, that kind of blissful experience, it goes from almost feeling that it's happening naturally to something that you have to cultivate and work on. You have to like work on your date nights. You have to work on resolving conflict. You have to, again, like work on keeping your love and your focus towards your spouse and not letting your heart or your eyes drift. It becomes a lot of work. And I think that that's something that singles hear all the time, that, you know, marriage is hard work, but you just don't believe it. I think, you know, at least for me, I'll speak for myself. When I was a single person, I was in such a love drought. I just felt just so like, oh, I just need love. I need love. I need love, that I couldn't even fathom any difficulties really or struggles in marriage. I knew that there would be some on a logical level, but I just couldn't grasp how much work that a truly happy marriage does require. So, going along with that, I would say that the honeymoon can end quickly and abruptly. For us, we literally had a 1 week honeymoon that was like really blissful and really sweet, and like he was just like really nice and like, oh, what do you want to do? You know, where do you want to eat? It just seemed like, oh, this is so wonderful. And it's kind of a little humorous now, but literally on the drive back home from the honeymoon, we kind of had our first fight, and it was over money, which I'll get into that a little bit later. But I'm telling you, that first year of marriage, that first season, some people have like a honeymoon phase that lasts a year or even 2 years. But some people have a honeymoon phase that lasts a week. One of my best friends in the past, like, she didn't even have a full honeymoon phase because they were arguing on the honeymoon. So again, even in a God-written love story where God has supernaturally brought the two of you together and you're like, oh, I know this is the Lord. Like, it can be kind of shocking and even dismaying when it's like, oh my goodness, there's conflict. I've never seen that side of this person before. And maybe I can do another video on it after like talking with my husband and seeing what he wants me to share. But I did have some surprises about him, and he had some surprises about me in that first year of marriage. And we did have a unique situation in that we had pretty much dated, got engaged, and married in a 6-month time frame. So maybe there was a little more of a shock and a surprise for us than, let's say, couples that have been together for 5 years and engaged for 1 year and then they get married. But still, I've heard it time and time again that there's just something about being married that it just seems like all of the flaws can come to the surface at once, and it can be a little bit of a shock. All right. So here's another one that I want. This is kind of directed to the ladies, but if a guy is watching, this is something you can be aware of, you know, for the lady in your life. So it seems in many ways that girls and women, ladies, can be very focused on the guy, but it seems like to guys, it's like their life is a kind of a pie, and like, you know, their lady friend, their wife has a certain segment, job, sports, hobbies, you know, just them kind of sitting in there, they call the nothing box, where they're just sitting and thinking. And so I think, for me at least, I'll speak for myself, when I first got married, I felt weird even making a plan for my day until I knew, like, well, what is my husband going to be doing? Is he going to be off, you know, from school or work? Well, what does he want to do? And so it'd be kind of awkward because I'd kind of like sit around like without any kind of plan for my day, kind of like a little puppy, like, oh, okay, what are we going to do? And meanwhile, he's not really thinking about like, oh, where's my wife? What does she want to do? Like, are we going to go for a walk in the park? Are we going to have, you know, an exciting 2.5-hour brunch over the lake followed by dancing in the moonlight? Like, no, he was just like, la la la. Okay, maybe I'll, like, you know, be on the internet. Maybe I got to study. Maybe I got like a little to-do list. And so I kind of just found myself whenever we were home together, which the first year wasn't much because we were both kind of busy with things, but I just found myself kind of feeling lost a little bit. And so I would encourage ladies to just realize that it's very difficult to put into words, but your focus is going to tend to be consumed maybe with your husband, and it can feel hurtful and confusing when it feels like your husband is not necessarily consumed with you. And it's been said that sometimes with guys in the hunter-gatherer mentality, they kind of feel like they do a lot of like the romance and the dating and the Romeo stuff when they're trying to get the girl, but sometimes, I don't know if you call it a flaw or like a habit or something, but once they get the lady, sometimes they need to be trained on, okay, how do I continue the romance? How do I continue to pursue my wife's heart? How do I continue, you know, to facilitate this romance? So that can be like a cold bucket of water to the face a little bit for women when they just kind of feel like, all right, I'm sitting around and I don't know what to do. So I would encourage ladies in their single season, or even if you're kind of in this situation when you're married, to kind of have a life of your own. And I want to say, I don't mean in terms of like y'all are living in different cities and have different sets of friends and all of your hobbies are different. Like, that wouldn't be healthy. But you just may want to have some things, even if there are things around the house that if your husband's occupied with something, if he's like, you know, a person that plays video games or likes football or has some kind of hobby like fishing or running or something, when he's like doing his own guy thing or whatever, it's really healthy for you to have maybe some of your own girl things. So maybe, you know, you love reading novels, or you really like, I don't know, decorating, and you like cooking, who knows, I don't know, you like fly fishing yourself, I don't know, but it just is good to have that mindset that it's not the way romantic comedies paint things. I think a lot of romantic comedies and novels and books are all very focused on, that electric, obsessive Romeo and Juliet consuming kind of love, which again, if you're lucky, that thing will last you 2 years. More likely than not, within a year, all of that's gone. It's just gone, and you're just, you love the person, but it's not the same. It's just so important. I can't emphasize that enough. Nobody can escape it. Nobody can avoid it. And that's why, unfortunately, so many affairs and divorces and problems happen to couples within the first 7 years of their marriage. In the olden days, they called it the 7-year itch. And it was just basically this, they craved those feelings of intoxicating love again. And instead of really doing the hard work of cultivating that with their spouse, they feel that feeling again, maybe instantly for a coworker, an old friend or something, and they think, oh, this is the person I'm supposed to be with, and that cycle keeps perpetuating itself. So instead of having that whole mess, just know, kind of going back to the first one, you need to have your relationship with God solid. You need to kind of have some hobbies and interests of your own. You cannot put all of that on your husband to fulfill, because he literally can't. And don't be hurt or upset if sometimes he just has his own interest and he just wants to do what he wants to do, and sometimes that may not include, just like gazing at you in the sunset. All right, so here's just a couple of more practical things that I will mention. I will say you probably want to kind of hash out 2 big things before you get married. You want to hash out both of your perspectives on money and both of your perspectives on things like the division of labor, meaning who's going to work, who's going to stay home, who's going to do chores, how will that change in different seasons of your life? Because I alluded to that a little bit earlier in the video, but really, I think with my husband and I, we really had some huge disagreements on finances. And there's no time to get into all of them now. If anybody's interested, I could tell you about them. Just type in the comments if you want a video about what we learned about money. But I can tell you this, we came from very different households, very different standards of living, very different financial habits. And so we had a lot of shocks early in the marriage and a lot of conflict. I'll just be honest with you. And as I mentioned earlier again, it was kind of interesting because although it seemed like a lot of the housework and things fell to me just by default, interestingly enough, my husband had very specific standards and a vision of what it should look like. And since it was already a weakness of mine, it felt kind of like a double whammy. It's like, okay, wow, not only am I not that great at this household stuff, but my husband had Martha Stewart for a mom and thinks that everything should be done meticulously like this, and I can't even get it done in a basic way. So those are just the silly little things that when you're rapturously in love, you're not thinking about who's going to do the dishes and where are we going to give our money, how much money will we give money at all, what are your thoughts about having debt, for example, student loan debt, what is your goals for things like renting versus buying a home. There's just so many things that hopefully a good pre-marriage counselor can work with you and walk you through. We did have some brief pre-marriage counseling, which was a blessing, but I would just highly encourage you to kind of start thinking about those things and working through those things. When you're single, it's never too late. Once you get married, you know what, you can still, find yourself a good money course. I know a lot of people recommend Dave Ramsey. There's so many, if you're a Christian, so many Christian money management things out there. And oh my goodness, these days on YouTube, there's 10 billion channels on how to clean and how to manage a home and how to stay organized. And so those are just some of the things all mixed together that were a huge shock to me. And I just want to encourage you again, if you're single, do not believe that being married is the cure to all of your problems, because I promise you it's not. And if you're married and a little bit discouraged that things have been a lot harder than you thought, maybe a lot less romantic than you were hoping for, just remember that all of those things are so incredibly normal. Marriage is a lot of work, and the warm fuzzies eventually fizzle out. So that's all I'll say for now, and I would love to hear your ideas for what you'd like me to do videos on in the future. So I love you guys. Have a great day.